The axe came down with a dull thud that echoed across the empty prairie. But Delilah Zimmerman's arms trembled so badly the blade barely penetrated the log at all. She wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her fair skin, and raised the axe again despite knowing her strength was nearly gone. Winter was coming to Chloride, New Mexico territory, and the stack of firewood beside her cabin was nowhere near enough to last until spring. 3 months had passed since they buried Robert beneath the cottonwood tree on the hillside, and every day since had been a lesson in exactly how much she had depended on her husband for survival out here in this harsh, unforgiving land. She was 24 years old and had never expected to be alone. When they had left Missouri 2 years ago, full of dreams and determination, the future had seemed bright despite the hardships everyone warned them about. Robert had been strong and capable, and she had been young and eager to build a life together in the West. Now he was gone, taken by a rattlesnake bite that had festered despite everything the doctor in town had tried, and she was left with 160 acres of land, a small cabin, 3 chickens, and the growing certainty that she would not make it through the winter. The axe came down again, and this time it stuck in the wood. She struggled to pull it free, her shoulders aching from hours of work that had produced pathetically little to show for the effort. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if she had any energy left to appreciate such things. She finally wrenched the axe free and was about to take another swing when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Her heart seized with the familiar fear that came whenever strangers approached the property. A woman alone was vulnerable in ways that kept her awake at night, and she had taken to keeping Robert's old rifle loaded and near the door at all times. She set down the axe and moved toward the cabin, trying to appear calm while her pulse raced. The rider came into view around the bend in the dirt path that served as a road. He sat tall in the saddle on a large roan horse, dressed in work clothes that had seen better days but were clean and well mended. As he drew closer, she could see he was somewhere in his early 30s, with dark hair that needed a trim and a face weathered by sun and wind. He had the look of a man who made his living outdoors, and there was something careful in the way he approached, as if he was aware that his presence might be frightening. He stopped his horse a respectful distance from where she stood and removed his hat, revealing more of his sun-bronzed face. His eyes were a surprising shade of blue-green like river water in summer. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and steady, "I apologize for intruding. My name is Benjamin Rutherford. I have the ranch about 5 miles north of here, up near the base of the mountains." She knew the place he meant. It was one of the larger operations in the area, with a good water source and grazing land that stayed green longer than most. She had never met the owner, though Robert had mentioned him a few times after seeing him in town. "Mr. Rutherford," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. "I am Delilah Zimmerman. What brings you out this way?" He shifted in his saddle, looking uncomfortable. "I was in town yesterday, and I heard about your husband passing. I want to say how sorry I am for your loss. I also heard that you were trying to manage the place on your own, and I thought—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I thought you could use some help with the heavier work. I know that is forward of me, and if you would prefer I leave you be, I will do that. But I have some time before the worst of winter sets in, and it does not sit right with me, knowing there is someone nearby who might need assistance." Delilah felt a complicated tangle of emotions rise in her chest. Pride wanted her to send him away, to prove that she could manage on her own. But practicality and the ache in her shoulders from the day's futile labor argued otherwise. She studied him carefully, trying to gauge his intentions. Some men would see a widow as easy prey, but there was something genuine in his expression, a quiet sincerity that did not seem calculated. "That is kind of you," she said slowly, "but I do not have money to pay for help." "I did not ask for payment, madam. I am offering assistance as a neighbor. We all need help sometimes, and out here, looking after each other is just what people do, or what they should do anyway." The simplicity of his statement, delivered without any hint of self-righteousness, made her decision easier. She glanced back at the pitiful pile of split wood and the much larger pile of logs still waiting. "I was trying to get enough firewood put up for winter," she admitted. "But I am not making very good progress." Benjamin swung down from his horse with an easy grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. He was tall, probably a few inches over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of lean, muscular build that came from hard physical work. He tied his horse to the fence post and walked over to examine her woodpile and the logs waiting to be split. "You have got a good amount of wood here," he said. "It just needs to be split and stacked. If you do not mind, I could make a dent in this pile before dark." Before she could respond, he had picked up her axe and was testing its weight and balance. He ran his thumb along the edge and frowned slightly. This blade could use sharpening. It would make the work easier. "Do you have a whetstone?" "In the barn," she said, still feeling somewhat dazed by this sudden turn of events. "On the shelf near the door." He nodded and headed toward the small barn that leaned slightly to one side. She watched him go, noticing the confident way he moved, the purposeful stride of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done and how to do it. He returned a few minutes later with the whetstone and settled onto the chopping stump, beginning to work on the axe blade with practiced, efficient motions. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked, feeling the need to fill the silence with something other than the rasp of stone on steel. "About 8 years now. I came out from Texas originally, worked as a ranch hand for a while, and saved everything I could. When the land office opened up parcels in this area, I filed my claim and started building. It has been a lot of work, but it is good land. The water is reliable, and the grass holds up better than in a lot of places." He paused in his sharpening to look up at her. "Your husband chose well with this property. That creek that runs through your south section does not run dry, even in the worst summers. That is valuable." She felt a pang of grief at the mention of Robert, but it was duller now than it had been in those first raw weeks. He was very careful about choosing the land. He wanted to make sure we would have a good foundation for building our future. Benjamin nodded soberly and returned to his work on the blade. After a few more minutes, he tested the edge with his thumb and seemed satisfied. He stood and approached the wood pile, selected a log, and set it on the stump. The axe came down with a clean, powerful stroke that split the wood perfectly in two. He worked steadily, with an economy of motion that showed years of experience. Where she had struggled and strained for meager results, he made it look effortless. The rhythmic thunk of the axe became a kind of meditation, and she found herself standing there watching longer than she probably should have. "I should get some water from the well," she said finally, more to give herself something to do than because she was particularly thirsty. "Would you like some? It is getting warm still, even this late in the season." "That would be welcome, madam. Thank you." She went to the well and drew up a bucket of cold, clear water. She filled a tin cup and brought it to him. He paused in his work, leaning the axe against the stump, and took the cup with a grateful nod. She watched as he drank, noticing the way his throat worked, the sheen of sweat on his face despite the cooling afternoon air. There was something about watching a man work, seeing the strength and capability in his movements, that stirred something in her she had thought buried with her husband. She pushed the feeling away, uncomfortable with it. It was too soon, and she barely knew this man. "I appreciate this more than I can say," she told him. "I was beginning to think I would have to give up and go back east before the snow came." He handed the cup back to her, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "It would be a shame for you to lose this land. You have got a good start here. With a little help, you could make a real go of it." "A little help," she repeated, hearing the understatement in his words. "I am learning that everything out here requires more help than one person can manage alone. Robert and we work together on everything. I did not realize how much I depended on him until he was gone." "That is the way it should be," Benjamin said quietly. "Partnership. Marriage should be two people building something together. I am sorry you lost that." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "You sound like you speak from experience." He was quiet for a moment, then picked up the axe again. "I was engaged once back in Texas. She decided that ranch life was not what she wanted after all. She married a banker and moved to San Antonio. That was a long time ago." "I am sorry." He shrugged, but she could see the old hurt in the set of his shoulders. "It worked out for the best. If she could not handle the hard times, we would not have made it anyway." He swung the axe again, and another log split cleanly. "But it did teach me something about doing things alone. It is possible, but it is harder. And lonelier." They fell into a comfortable silence after that, with only the sound of splitting wood and the occasional call of a bird marking the passage of time. Delilah went about her other chores, feeding the chickens and checking on the small garden that was mostly finished for the season. She found herself glancing toward Benjamin frequently, reassured by his steady presence and the growing pile of split wood. By the time the sun touched the horizon, he had split an impressive amount of wood, far more than she could have managed in a week of trying. He set down the axe and began stacking the wood against the side of the cabin in neat rows that would shed rain and snow. "That should help," he said, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "But you are going to need more to get through the whole winter. I will come back in a day or two and work on it some more if that is all right with you." "I cannot ask you to do that," she protested, even as part of her desperately hoped he would insist. "You are not asking. I am offering." He walked to his horse and untied the reins. "I meant what I said about neighbors helping each other. Besides, I have the time right now. My hired men can handle things at my place for a while." "At least let me feed you dinner," she said impulsively. "It is not much, but I have stew left from yesterday and I made bread this morning." He hesitated, and she could see him weighing the propriety of it. A man and a woman alone, with her being a widow only 3 months out from her husband's death. People would talk if they knew. But then he nodded slowly. "That would be nice, madam. Thank you." She led him inside the small cabin, suddenly acutely aware of how modest her home must seem. It was just one main room with a sleeping area curtained off in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, a stove and shelves that held their few dishes and supplies. But it was clean and tidy, and the stew that hung over the fire smelled good when she lifted the lid. Benjamin removed his hat and stood somewhat awkwardly near the door until she gestured for him to sit at the table. She ladled stew into 2 bowls and sliced thick pieces of bread, then poured water for both of them. It felt strange to have someone else sitting in Robert's chair, but it also felt less lonely than the meals she had been eating in silence for the past months. "This is very good," Benjamin said after his first bite. "You are a fine cook. My mother taught me." She said that no matter how hard life got, sitting down to a good meal made everything a little better. Smart woman. They ate in silence for a few minutes, but it was not uncomfortable. There was something peaceful about sharing a meal with someone, about the simple domestic act of eating together. "How are you managing otherwise?" he asked. I do not mean to pry, but do you have enough supplies to last the winter? She considered lying, but what was the point? I am managing. I have some money put by, but not much. I have been selling eggs in town when I can, and I preserved what I could from the garden. It will be tight, but I should be able to make it through. He nodded thoughtfully. If you need anything, anything at all, I want you to know that you can ask. I do not mean that in any way except as one neighbor to another. You should not have to struggle when there are people nearby who could help. You barely know me, she pointed out, though she was touched by his sincerity. That is true. But I know what it is like to be alone and trying to make a go of it out here. And I know that your husband was well regarded in town. The few times I spoke with him, he seemed like a good man. That speaks well of you too. Delilah felt tears prick at her eyes unexpectedly. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken kindly about Robert, and the grief that she had been holding at bay surged up suddenly. She blinked rapidly, trying to compose herself. I am sorry, she said, her voice catching. I thought I was past this. Grief does not work on a schedule, Benjamin said gently. My father died when I was 20, and I still have moments when something reminds me of him, and it hits me all over again. There is no shame in mourning someone you loved. She looked at him through her tears and saw genuine understanding in his eyes. This was not just empty platitudes. He knew what he was talking about. Thank you, she whispered. For the wood, for the kind words, for all of it. He finished his stew and stood, clearly wanting to give her space to collect herself. I should be going. It will be dark soon and I have got a ways to ride, but I will come back in a couple of days if that suits you. It does. Thank you, Mr. Rutherford. Benjamin, please. Mr. Rutherford makes me feel like I should be older and wiser than I am. She managed a small smile. Then you should call me Delilah. He settled his hat back on his head and nodded. Delilah, that is a pretty name. After he left, riding off into the gathering darkness, Delilah stood in the doorway for a long time, watching until he disappeared from view. The cabin felt emptier than it had before he came, and she was not sure if that was a good thing or not. She touched her hand to her chest, feeling the complicated mix of emotions there. Gratitude, certainly. Relief at the help with the wood. But also something else, something that made her feel guilty and excited all at once. She was attracted to him. There was no point in denying it to herself. But it was too soon, far too soon to be thinking of such things. Robert had only been gone 3 months. What kind of wife was she to be noticing another man's shoulders and the color of his eyes? But then again, what was she supposed to do? Spend the rest of her life alone mourning? Robert would not have wanted that for her. In one of their last conversations, when he knew the infection from the snakebite was not getting better, he had made her promise not to give up on life if he died. You are young and strong, Delilah, he had told her, his voice weak but urgent. Do not waste your life being sad. Build something good. Be happy. That is all I want for you. At the time, she had begged him not to talk that way, had insisted he would get better. But he had known and he had made her promise. Still, 3 months felt too soon. She pushed the thoughts away and focused on cleaning up from dinner, trying not to think about when Benjamin might come back. 2 days later, she was attempting to repair a broken fence rail when she heard the hoofbeats again. Her heart leaped before she could stop it, and she turned to see Benjamin riding up with a pack mule in tow. The mule was loaded with supplies, and she felt a mix of gratitude and concern as he dismounted. I hope you do not mind, he said, gesturing to the mule. I had to go into town anyway, and I picked up a few things. Extra flour, salt, some coffee, and dried beans, just staples that keep well. I thought you might could use them. Delilah felt her throat tighten. It was too much, too generous, but she also knew that refusing would be foolish pride when she genuinely needed the help. "I cannot take all that without paying you," she said. "Consider it payment for that good stew the other night. That was worth its weight in coffee as far as I am concerned." She knew he was giving her a way to accept without feeling like charity, and she was grateful for his tact. "At least let me cook for you again. It seems only fair. I would never turn down a home-cooked meal, but first I should finish that wood. And it looks like you could use some help with that fence." They worked together throughout the morning, falling into an easy rhythm. Benjamin split more wood, while Delilah continued with the fence, but he came over periodically to help with the parts that required more strength than she could muster. He was patient in teaching her how to brace the rails properly and which knots to use for securing the wire. "You have got good instincts for this work," he told her as they finished replacing a section of fence. "You just need more muscle behind it, and that comes with practice. Or by having someone around who already has the muscle," she said, unable to help smiling at him. He grinned back, and she noticed the way his eyes crinkled at the corners. "That helps too." As the days turned into weeks, Benjamin's visits became regular. He never stayed away for more than a few days, always showing up with some task he thought needed doing or some supply he claimed he had extra of. He repaired the barn door, replaced some of the rotting boards on the porch, and helped her get the rest of the garden harvested and the beds prepared for winter. Each time he came, they would work together, then share a meal, and slowly, Delilah found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that had nothing to do with the help he provided. They talked while they worked, sharing stories about their lives and their dreams for the future. She learned that Benjamin had grown up on a ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 boys. His father had been a hard man but fair, and his mother had died when he was 12. He spoke of his brothers with affection, though they were scattered now across Texas and Oklahoma territory. "Do you ever think about going back?" she asked one day as they worked on mucking out the small barn. "Sometimes. But this is home now. I have built something here and I am not inclined to leave it. What about you? Do you think about going back to Missouri?" She paused in her work, considering the question seriously. "Sometimes, especially on the hard days. But Robert and I put so much into this place. It feels like giving up on him to leave now. And honestly, despite everything, I have come to love this land. It is beautiful in its own harsh way." "It is," he agreed. "You have to be tough to love it, but once it gets under your skin, nowhere else feels quite right." November arrived with the first real cold snap, and with it came a new problem. Delilah's roof started leaking in 2 places during a cold rain. She put buckets under the leaks and tried to patch them from the inside, but she knew it was a temporary fix at best. When Benjamin arrived 2 days later, he took one look at the water stains on her ceiling and insisted on climbing up to inspect the roof. He came down looking serious. "You have got some shingles that need replacing, and the flashing around your chimney is coming loose. This needs to be fixed before the snow comes, or you are going to have real problems." "I do not know how to fix a roof," she admitted, feeling frustrated with her own limitations. "That is all right. I do. But I am going to need to bring some supplies and maybe one of my hired men to help. It is a 2-person job at least. Benjamin, I cannot keep letting you do all this for me. You have already done so much." He climbed down from the ladder and faced her, his expression serious. "Delilah, I want you to listen to me. I am not doing this because I feel obligated and I am not keeping score. I am doing this because I want to, because I—" He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "Because I care about what happens to you. If that makes you uncomfortable, I will stop coming around. But I need you to know that everything I have done willingly and gladly." Her heart was pounding as she looked at him. The air between them felt charged with something unspoken, something that had been building for weeks now. "It does not make me uncomfortable," she said quietly. "I care about what happens to you too." They stood there in the barn, looking at each other, and Delilah felt the world narrow down to just the two of them. She could see the question in his eyes, the uncertainty about whether it was too soon, whether she was ready for what seemed to be growing between them. "It has been 4 months," she said, knowing he would understand what she meant. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like years. I loved Robert, and I will always miss him, but he made me promise not to give up on being happy." "I do not want to rush you into anything," Benjamin said, his voice low and earnest. "And I do not want to dishonor your husband's memory. But I would be lying if I said I did not have feelings for you. These past weeks, getting to know you, watching you be so strong and determined. Delilah, you are an remarkable woman." She felt tears well up, but they were not tears of sadness. "I have feelings for you too. I have been trying not to, thinking it was too soon and I should wait longer, but the heart does not seem to work on schedules." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Then maybe we could see where this goes. Take things slow but honest." "I would like that," she said, and when he smiled, it felt like sunshine breaking through clouds. The next day, Benjamin arrived with one of his ranch hands, a taciturn older man named Pete, who had apparently been with him since the beginning. They spent the entire day on her roof, replacing shingles and fixing the flashing while Delilah cooked a large meal for all of them. When they finally came down, cold and tired but satisfied with their work, she fed them roast chicken and potatoes and the last of her preserved green beans. Pete nodded his approval of the meal and gave Benjamin a knowing look that made the younger man flush slightly. After they ate, Pete excused himself to head back to the ranch, leaving Delilah and Benjamin alone as the evening settled in. They sat together on the newly repaired porch, wrapped in blankets against the cold, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Benjamin had his arm around her shoulders and she leaned against him, feeling safe and content in a way she had not felt since before Robert died. "Tell me about Texas," she said. "What was it like growing up there?" He was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing absent patterns on her shoulder. "Hot," he said finally, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Especially in summer. We had a decent-sized spread, a few thousand acres. My father ran cattle and broke horses. He was good at it, built up a solid reputation. My brothers and I, we grew up working from before sunrise to after sunset. It was hard, but it was good too. We were together, we had purpose." "Do you miss them, your brothers?" "Sometimes, but we were never the kind of family that stayed in close touch. We loved each other, but we were all independent. I think my father raised us that way on purpose, knowing we would all head out to make our own way eventually." "What made you choose New Mexico territory?" "I wanted land that was not already picked over. Texas was getting crowded, at least the parts where the land was good. Out here, there was still opportunity, still space to build something from the ground up." He paused. "What about you? What was Missouri like?" "Greener," she said with a soft laugh. "So much greener. Trees everywhere and rain that came regularly. The winters were cold, but not like they are here. Everything felt softer somehow, but also smaller. Robert and I, we wanted room to grow, to build something that was truly ours. In Missouri, all the good land was already owned by old families. Out here, we had a chance. Do you regret it? Coming west," she thought about it carefully. "No. Even with everything that has happened, I do not regret it. I wish Robert were still here, wish things had turned out differently, but I do not regret the choice to come." Benjamin tightened his arm around her. "He would be proud of you, I think, the way you have kept going, kept fighting to hold onto this place." I could not have done it without you. You could have. You are stronger than you know, but I am glad you did not have to do it alone." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, until the cold became too much to ignore. Benjamin stood reluctantly, reaching down to help her up. "I should get going. It is a long ride back, and it is going to be a cold one." She did not want him to leave, but she knew he had to. "Will you come back soon? Day after tomorrow, if that suits you. I thought maybe we could go into town together. You must need supplies, and it would be good for people to see us together. Let them know that you are not alone out here." She understood what he was really saying. Let people know that she had someone looking after her, someone who had a claim on her. In the rough country around Chloride, that kind of knowledge could keep trouble at bay. "I would like that," she said. He leaned down and kissed her forehead gently, a chaste gesture that somehow felt more intimate than anything else had. "Sleep well, Delilah. You too, Benjamin." The trip into Chloride 2 days later was an event. The town was small, just a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of other buildings. But it was the center of the scattered community, and news traveled fast. When Benjamin drove up to her cabin in his wagon to collect her, she knew that by the end of the day, everyone in the area would know about it. She wore her best dress, a dark blue wool that was suitable for a widow but not ostentatiously mournful. Benjamin helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hand lingering on hers for just a moment longer than necessary, and they set off down the rutted road toward town. "Nervous?" he asked, glancing at her. "A little. People will talk. Let them. We are not doing anything wrong. Some will think 4 months is too soon. Some would think 4 years was too soon. You cannot live your life by what other people think is proper." She knew he was right, but it did not make it easier. In Missouri, there had been strict rules about mourning periods and proper behavior for widows. She had no idea if people out here held to the same standards, but she suspected small towns were the same everywhere when it came to gossip. The general store was busy when they arrived, and Delilah saw several heads turn as Benjamin helped her down from the wagon. He kept his hand on her elbow as they walked inside, a gesture that was both supportive and clearly proprietary. Martha Henderson, who ran the store with her husband, gave Delilah a warm smile. "Mrs. Zimmerman, how nice to see you. We have been worried about how you were managing." "I am doing well, thank you. Benjamin has been kind enough to help me with some of the heavier work around the place." Martha's eyes flicked to Benjamin and back to Delilah, and her smile widened. "That is good to hear. A woman alone out there, it is not right. You need someone looking after you." They went through the store, selecting supplies while Martha kept up a steady stream of conversation. By the time they left, Delilah was certain that Martha would be spreading the word about Benjamin and her to anyone who would listen. The thought made her anxious, but Benjamin seemed unconcerned. "That went well," he said as they loaded the supplies into the wagon. "Did it?" "I felt like we were on display." "We were, but that is not necessarily a bad thing. Now people know you have someone watching out for you, and anyone who might have been thinking about taking advantage of a woman alone will think twice." She had not really considered that angle, but she supposed he had a point. Still, she was relieved when they left town and headed back toward her cabin. They spent the rest of the day putting away supplies and working on various tasks around the property. Benjamin was teaching her how to make better repairs on her own, showing her the proper way to use tools and explaining why certain methods worked better than others. She was a quick learner, and he was a patient teacher. As the sun began to set, she made them dinner, and they ate together at her small table. It was becoming routine now, these shared meals, and she realized how much she had come to depend on his company. The loneliness that had been her constant companion since Robert's death had receded, replaced by something warmer and more hopeful. "I have been thinking," Benjamin said as they finished eating. "Winter is going to be here in earnest soon. I worry about you being out here alone when the snow comes. If something happened, if you got hurt or sick, it could be days before anyone knew. I have managed so far, I know you have, but that does not mean you should have to keep managing alone." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I know it is soon, and I know people will talk. But I want you to consider something. You could come stay at my ranch for the winter. I have a house with plenty of room. You could have your own space, and there would be my hired men there too, so it would be proper. You would be safer, warmer, and you would not have to worry about being snowed in alone." She stared at him, surprised by the offer. "Benjamin, I cannot just leave my property. It would still be here in the spring. And I could have one of my men check on it regularly, make sure nothing happened to it. People really would talk if I did that. Probably. But would you rather be the subject of gossip or freeze to death alone because you were too proud to accept help?" She wanted to be offended by the bluntness of his statement, but he had a point. The winters here were harsh, and she had no real experience with dealing with them. Last year, she and Robert had struggled through together, and there had been times when she had been genuinely frightened by the depth of the snow and the bitter cold. "Let me think about it," she said finally. "That is all I ask." Over the next few weeks, as November turned into December and the weather grew colder, Delilah found herself seriously considering Benjamin's offer. The first real snowstorm hit in early December, dumping nearly a foot of snow overnight. She spent the next day huddled by her stove, trying to keep warm and wondering what she would do if the snow kept falling. When Benjamin showed up the following day, having ridden through the snow to check on her, she made her decision. "I will come stay at your ranch," she told him. "But only if you are sure it is proper. I do not want to damage your reputation or mine." "It will be fine," he assured her. "I will make sure everyone understands the arrangement. You will have your own room, and with Pete and the other hands there, no one can say anything untoward is happening." They spent the next few days preparing. Benjamin helped her secure the cabin as best they could, boarding up the windows and making sure everything was protected from the weather. She packed her essential belongings, including the few treasures she had brought from Missouri and the things that had belonged to Robert. She was not ready to let go of those yet, might never be ready, but she could at least keep them safe. Benjamin's ranch was larger and more prosperous than she had expected. The house was a solid 2-story structure built of timber and stone, with a wide porch and shutters on all the windows. The barn was substantial, and there were several outbuildings scattered around the property. As they approached, she could see cattle in the distance, dark shapes against the white snow. "It is wonderful," she said, genuinely impressed. "I have worked hard on it," he said, and she could hear the pride in his voice. "It is not fancy, but it is solid and it is mine." He showed her inside, and she was struck by how comfortable everything was. The main room had a large stone fireplace, sturdy furniture, and woven rugs on the wood floors. The kitchen was well equipped, and upstairs there were 3 bedrooms. "You can have this one," he said, showing her to a room at the front of the house. It had a real bed with a thick mattress, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the snowy landscape. "I am at the end of the hall and Pete has the room in between. The other hands stay in the bunkhouse, so you will have privacy." "It is more than I expected," she admitted. "Thank you, Benjamin. I want you to be comfortable, and I want you to think of this as your home for as long as you need it to be." They settled into a routine over the following weeks. Delilah took over most of the cooking, which the men appreciated immensely. She also helped with mending and other domestic tasks that had been neglected. In return, she had warmth, safety, and company. But more than that, she had time with Benjamin. They would sit together in the evenings after the work was done, talking or simply enjoying each other's company in comfortable silence. Sometimes they would play cards or he would read aloud from one of his few books. Other times they would just watch the fire and talk about their hopes for the future. Christmas came, and Delilah found herself more content than she had expected. She made a special dinner for everyone, using supplies Benjamin had brought from town. She had even managed to make a small cake, which the ranch hands devoured with enthusiastic praise. Benjamin gave her a shawl he had bought in town, a beautiful thing in soft blue wool, and she gave him a shirt she had sewn in secret, using fabric she had brought from her cabin. "You did not have to do this," he said, but she could see he was pleased. "I wanted to. You have done so much for me. It is the least I could do." After the hands had retired to the bunkhouse and Pete had gone upstairs to bed, Benjamin and Delilah sat together by the fire. He had his arm around her and she was leaning against his shoulder, feeling warm and safe. "This has been the best Christmas I have had in years," he said quietly. "For me too. I thought it would be hard, the first Christmas without Robert, and it was in some ways, but having this." She gestured around the comfortable room. It made it bearable, more than bearable. He turned to look at her, his face serious in the firelight. "Delilah, I need to tell you something. I know it has only been a few months since we met, and I know you are still grieving your husband. But I have fallen in love with you. I do not expect you to say it back, and I will understand if you need more time, but I needed you to know." Her heart felt like it might burst. She had known her feelings for him were deepening, but hearing him say the words made it real in a way that both thrilled and frightened her. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, thinking it was too soon and I was being disloyal to Robert's memory, but I cannot help it. You have become so important to me, so essential to my life. I do not know what I would do without you now." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized were falling. "You will never have to find out. I am not going anywhere." When he kissed her, it was gentle and sweet, full of promise and restrained passion. She kissed him back, feeling something inside her that had been frozen and dead since Robert's death begin to thaw and come back to life. They stayed there by the fire for a long time, holding each other and talking quietly about the future they might have together. As winter deepened, their relationship deepened with it. They were careful to maintain propriety, aware that Pete and the ranch hands were watching, but everyone could see what was developing between them. Pete, in particular, seemed pleased. One evening when Delilah was cleaning up after dinner, the old cowhand spoke to her quietly. "I have known Benjamin for a long time," he said. "Since he first came to this territory, I have never seen him as happy as he has been these past months. You are good for him, madam." "He is good for me too," she said softly. "He is a good man. He will treat you right. And if you are worried about what people might say, do not be. Anyone who knows Benjamin will know he has done everything proper." She was touched by his words and his obvious affection for his employer. It was clear that Benjamin had built not just a ranch but a kind of family out here, with men who were loyal to him and respected him. January brought bitter cold and more snow. Delilah was profoundly grateful not to be alone in her cabin, trying to keep warm and wondering if she had enough wood to last. Here, the house was well built and warm, the fireplaces and stove keeping the cold at bay. She spent her days cooking, mending, and sometimes helping with the lighter chores around the ranch. She learned how to care for chickens in winter, how to help with the milking, and how to make butter and cheese. Benjamin taught her to ride better, taking her out on calmer days to check on the cattle and ride the boundaries of his property. She loved those rides, loved the sense of freedom and the beauty of the snow-covered landscape. And she loved being with him, talking and laughing and slowly building a life together. By February, when Benjamin asked her to marry him, it felt like the natural next step rather than a surprise. They were sitting on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the sunset paint the snow in shades of pink and gold. "I know some people will think it is too fast," he said, holding her hand tightly. "But I am sure of what I feel and I am sure of what I want. I want you to be my wife, Delilah. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in March as soon as the weather cleared enough to make the trip to town feasible. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church in Chloride with Pete and a few of Benjamin's friends as witnesses. Delilah wore a new dress in a soft gray, appropriate for a widow remarrying but pretty nonetheless. Benjamin wore his best suit, and the look in his eyes when he saw her walk down the aisle made her feel beautiful. Martha Henderson and some of the other women in town had organized a small reception afterward, with cake and coffee and warm wishes. If anyone disapproved of the speed of their courtship and marriage, they kept it to themselves. Most people seemed genuinely happy for them, and Delilah realized that she had been welcomed into the community in a way she had not been while she was alone. Their wedding night was spent in the hotel in town, a luxury that Benjamin insisted on. He was gentle and patient, understanding that while she was not an innocent girl, it had been a long time and this was a new beginning for her. She loved him for his consideration, for the way he made sure she felt cherished and safe. The next morning, they rode back to the ranch that was now truly their home together. Spring was beginning to show itself in small ways, with the snow melting and the first hints of green appearing in sheltered spots. Delilah felt like she was emerging from a long winter herself, stepping into a new season of her life. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Delilah had been concerned that sharing space and adjusting to each other's habits would be difficult, but they seemed to fit together naturally. Benjamin was neat and organized, which she appreciated. She was a good cook and manager, which he appreciated. They both worked hard and valued the same things: honesty, loyalty, and building something lasting. In April, they went back to her original homestead to assess what could be salvaged and what needed to be done. The cabin had weathered the winter reasonably well, thanks to their preparations. They decided to keep the property but use it primarily for growing hay and as summer pasture for some of Benjamin's cattle. "It would be a shame to let it go," Benjamin said as they stood looking at the cabin that had been her home. "And it is good land. We can make use of it." "I am glad," she said. "I know I do not live here anymore, but it still means something to me. Robert and I put so much hope into this place." He put his arm around her. "We will honor that. We will make something good out of what you and he started." As spring turned into summer, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. The realization brought a complicated mix of emotions: joy at the thought of having a child with Benjamin, but also a strange sense of guilt, as if she was leaving Robert further behind with each step forward in her new life. Benjamin found her crying one evening and pulled her into his arms, letting her talk through her feelings without judgment. "I feel like I am forgetting him," she sobbed. "Like by being happy with you and excited about this baby, I am somehow erasing him." "You are not erasing him," Benjamin said firmly. "He was your husband and you loved him. That does not go away just because you have found love again. You can honor his memory and still build a future. The two are not mutually exclusive." "You really believe that?" "I do. And I think he would want you to be happy. Any man who truly loved you would want that." His words helped, and over time, Delilah found peace with the situation. She would always carry a part of Robert with her, always remember their time together. But she was also building a new life, and there was no shame in that. The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat was oppressive, and she struggled with morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon. But Benjamin was attentive and caring, making sure she rested and ate properly. Pete and the ranch hands treated her like precious china, insisting she not do any heavy work. In November, almost exactly a year after she had first come to stay at the ranch, Delilah gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, attended by a midwife from town and with Benjamin pacing anxiously downstairs. But when it was over and she held her baby boy in her arms, with Benjamin sitting beside her on the bed looking awed and terrified, she knew it had all been worth it. "What should we name him?" Benjamin asked, his voice hushed as he gently touched the baby's tiny hand. Delilah had been thinking about this. "I want to name him Robert Benjamin, after both the men who have meant the most to me." Benjamin looked at her with tears in his eyes. "Are you sure?" "You do not have to do that for me. I am not doing it for you. I am doing it because it feels right. Robert was my first love and you are my forever love. Our son should carry both those names." So Robert Benjamin Rutherford entered the world, a healthy, squalling baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined spirit. Over the following months, as they adjusted to life with an infant, Delilah marveled at how complete her life felt. She had gone from being a widow struggling to survive alone to being a wife and mother with a loving husband and a warm home. The following years brought more children, a daughter they named Margaret Rose, and then twin boys they named William and James. The ranch prospered, growing larger and more successful with each passing season. They added onto the house, building more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. They hired more help, including a young woman from town who came twice a week to help with the laundry and cleaning. Delilah's original homestead became a productive part of their operation, growing hay that fed their cattle through the winters and serving as summer pasture. They eventually built a small bunkhouse there for seasonal workers, and every year on the anniversary of Robert's death, Delilah would ride over and spend a few quiet moments at his grave under the cottonwood tree. Benjamin never objected to these visits, understanding that some part of her would always carry that loss. He would sometimes come with her, paying his respects to the man who had been her first husband, acknowledging the complicated truth that if Robert had not died, Delilah would not be his wife now. It was a strange thing to be grateful for someone's death while also honoring their memory, but they found a way to navigate it with grace. As the children grew, Delilah would tell them about Robert sometimes, wanting them to know that their home and part of their land had been started by a good man who had loved their mother and had dreams of building something lasting. Benjamin encouraged this, never threatened by the memory of his wife's first husband. "He was part of your story," he told her once, "and your story is part of our story. I would not want you to pretend he never existed." The town of Chloride grew slowly over the years, never becoming large but developing a stable community. Delilah and Benjamin became respected members of that community, known for their generosity and their willingness to help neighbors in need. They remembered what it had been like when Delilah was struggling alone, and they made sure to keep an eye out for others who might need assistance. When Pete finally grew too old to work, they insisted he stay on at the ranch, giving him a comfortable room and making sure he was cared for. He lived out his final years surrounded by the children he had helped watch grow up, treated like the beloved grandfather he effectively was. The years passed with the usual mix of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle. They lost cattle to harsh winters and drought. They celebrated when Robert Benjamin, their oldest, decided to stay on the ranch and learn the business rather than seeking his fortune elsewhere. They grieved when Margaret Rose died of fever at age 7, a loss that nearly broke Delilah, but that Benjamin helped her survive. Through it all, their love remained steady. Benjamin never took Delilah for granted, still treating her with the same careful respect and affection he had shown that first day when he rode up and offered to chop her wood. And Delilah never forgot how he had saved her, not just from the physical hardships of surviving alone, but from the loneliness and despair that had threatened to consume her after Robert's death. On their 20th wedding anniversary, they rode out together to her original homestead. The cabin was still there, maintained but mostly unused now except for storage. They sat on the porch where she had once sat with Benjamin after he had spent the day splitting wood for her, and they held hands as they looked out over the land. "You ever regret it?" Benjamin asked. "Marrying me so quickly, letting me into your life when you were still grieving?" "Never," she said firmly. "You gave me my life back, Benjamin. You gave me love and family and a home. I was drowning and you threw me a lifeline. I will never regret grabbing hold of it." "You gave me just as much," he said. "I was resigned to being alone, convinced that I was not meant for love and family, and then you came into my life and everything changed. We saved each other," she said softly. "We did." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains, surrounded by the life they had built together. In the distance, they could see their ranch, their home, with smoke rising from the chimney and their children and grandchildren going about their evening tasks. As the years continued to pass, they grew old together with the same grace they had brought to everything else in their lives. Benjamin's dark hair turned silver, and Delilah's blonde hair faded to white, but their love remained as strong as it had been on that day when he had first offered to chop wood for a struggling widow. Their children grew and married, some staying nearby and others seeking their fortunes in other territories. Robert Benjamin took over the main ranch operations, proving to be as capable and honest as his father. William and James started their own smaller ranch on land their parents helped them acquire. The grandchildren came, filling the house with noise and laughter, and reminding Delilah and Benjamin of when their own children had been young. On a warm spring day when Delilah was 68 and Benjamin was 71, they took one last ride out to the original homestead together. Benjamin was slowing down, his body showing the wear of a lifetime of hard work, but he still insisted on saddling the horses himself. They rode slowly, taking their time, enjoying the sunshine and the greening landscape. At the cabin, they sat on the porch steps, and Benjamin took her hand. "You remember the first day I came here?" he asked. "You were trying so hard to chop that wood, and you looked so tired and so determined not to give up. I remember being terrified when I heard your horse approaching, and then being too proud to accept your help, even though I desperately needed it. I am glad you let me help you. So am I." She squeezed his hand. "You saved my life that day, Benjamin, in every way that matters. And you saved mine. I was just existing before I met you, going through the motions. You gave me purpose and joy." They sat quietly, listening to the wind and the birds, surrounded by the piece of the land they had worked and loved. Eventually, they rose and rode slowly back to their ranch, to the home full of children and grandchildren, to the life they had built from that first moment when a widowed woman chopping wood alone had accepted help from a kind rancher. Benjamin lived another 5 years after that day, passing peacefully in his sleep with Delilah beside him. She mourned him as she had once mourned Robert, but with the comfort of knowing they had lived a full and happy life together. She had their children and grandchildren around her, and she had decades of good memories to sustain her. Delilah lived to be 82, spending her final years surrounded by the large, loving family she and Benjamin had created. She would often tell stories about the early days, about being alone and afraid, about the rancher who had shown up to chop wood and had ended up sharing everything else, including his whole life. The younger generations would listen, learning about the courage and love that had built their family. When she finally passed, on a spring morning with the windows open and the scent of new grass in the air, she was buried next to Benjamin on a hillside overlooking their ranch. Not far away, under the old cottonwood tree, Robert's grave was still carefully maintained, a reminder of where her journey had begun. The ranch continued on through their children and grandchildren, a legacy of hard work, determination, and love. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, family members would ride out to the original homestead and sit on the porch of the old cabin, remembering the widow who had been chopping wood alone and the rancher who had offered to help, never knowing that simple act of kindness would lead to a lifetime of love and a family that would endure for generations. The old cabin stood for many more years, a testament to the dreams of a young couple from Missouri and the new beginning forged from loss and loneliness. The land remained productive, the grass growing green each spring, the cattle grazing peacefully on the hills. And the story of Delilah and Benjamin became part of the family history, passed down through the generations as an example of how love could bloom even in the hardest circumstances, and how one person's kindness could change the course of a life.